Hey everybody, it's H, and welcome back for the second ever installment of Dune Pod, your one-stop shop to get ready for the new Dune movie coming out this fall. This week, I'm joined as always by my co-host Jason.
That whole world of albino reggae is not really a good look.
As we complete part 2 of our discussion of Frank Herbert's seminal science fiction masterpiece, Dune. We explore the dangers of following heroes, the complex religious themes in Dune, and which Matrix movie is truly the best. If you're enjoying the show, please be sure to leave us a rating and a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, as it really helps new listeners find us. And now, without further ado, Dune. 3, 2, 1, record. We're already recording, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what that actually does, but it does something.
It seems official.
I started to think about like what could some episodes look like. And definitely with the goal of like, let's mix it up and have a lot of fun with it. And so like we can do goofy stuff earlier or move things around or whatever, but Blade Runner, Jodorowsky, Sicario.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I've never seen actually.
What? Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I've never seen The King or Little Women either. So I'll have some homework to do. Zardoz, however, I have seen.
Yeah. Zardoz, I love. Like I think there is a modern remake of like a serious take on Zardoz where you basically do the core concept of it. You just figure out how to smooth out the cock is good or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a take on Zardoz. Zardoz, like I saw once and it kind of sort of blew my mind. I was like, yeah, I'm not. And I saw it like recently, like not as a kid. I saw it like as, you know, a 35-year-old or something. And I was not prepared. The only explanation I had was that the drugs must have been really good in that period of time, because it's like clearly it's like, okay, everyone was high
and wearing diapers.
Yeah.
Adult diaper sci-fi costumes.
Yeah. They really went for it. They had a vision.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the concept of it of like, once you've achieved immortality and you have to create another group of people to come destroy you from the inside, like, yeah, that's pretty radical.
Yeah, that's not unfamiliar territory for the Dune stuff. They just took a different slant.
Yeah, to get there.
Yeah.
Where we left things was at the end of book 1. Paul has just, essentially gotten his initial set of awareness, both Mentat awareness as well as Kwisatz Haderach awareness. And it was not triggered specifically by the spice, as we know. It was just triggered by the crisis and the intensity. And so I'm trying to figure out the exact timing of this. My notes aren't exactly clear. Like, They get out of the Thopter, they see another Thopter, but then at the end of book 2, they're kind of on their own. At the end of book 1, they're on their own. But then in book 2, they're back with Duncan again.
Yeah, you know, I have to say, I think this is a thing in the book that I don't entirely understand. And it feels almost like something that wasn't fully fleshed out, which is there's this notion that when Yui betrays them, that he's driven them into the arms of Duncan, and Paul knows that Duncan's flying the Thopter and drops something down for him. But then that connection feels like Duncan kind of goes away again and then shows up later basically just to die. But there's like Duncan's presence in the second book is always kind of like just out of eyesight. Like he's never really brought into focus. And I don't really understand that choice from a storytelling perspective, except to say that like the whole second book kind of has this, the whole second, middle part of the story has this feeling of Jessica and Paul being on the run. And then in the context of being on the run, they're deepening into the mystery of Arrakis and the mythology of that planet. And that reality kind of takes over, and their old life, as, Atreides kind of dissolves away. So I think that's probably the intention, which is that like these formative figures in Paul's life, these key household members, whether it's Gurney or Thufir or Duncan, are being pulled away or killed off explicitly in the case of Duncan. And Paul and Jessica are both taking on new identities and new names in this new life on Arrakis.
Right. It's almost like I'm picturing it as like sand blasting away, the edges and the comfort level, the water fat, and reducing them back down to this sort of, a more basic or fundamental state. And I guess what happened was that they were found by Duncan and Kynes.
Right.
So they have that initial, I guess book 2 starts with them on the run, trying to it's very mundane almost, but it's also meant to indicate the threat of that, they lose their tent and, their backpack. They got to go back and get it back out. Jessica's stuck in the sand. Is she in trouble? She goes into a prana bindu trance. So there's a lot of, it's funny compared to the rest of the books. There's a lot of action and there's a lot of stuff that's happening. Almost too much. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that's happening, but it's all at a little bit of a blur. My thinking, my sort of impression of book 2 is always this, it feels like, just like these sweeping vistas of the desert. There's lots of descriptions of the desert and sand and aridness and rock and stuff like that. But there's not, and there's action, but it's somewhat through a haze almost. It doesn't even feel as in sharp relief as it is in the first book, or especially in the third book. So the second book has this very different kind of pacing feel to it than the first third. But it of course establishes all of the major, it continues all of the major themes that are hinted at in the first.
Right. So Paul and Jessica meet up with Duncan and Liet Kynes.
Yeah.
There's a great moment. The additional respect is now there, right? Kynes is really treating Paul in a good way. And then that has the whole fantastic segment of the Sardaukar showing up. Duncan Idaho, gets killed. And it's man, too bad we're not going to get any more Duncan Idaho in this series. Would have loved to get a little more of that character. But I also love they sort of go behind the secret door and they're making their way out. I love the idea of the floor lights up as they're going and then the lights go down as they're making their way through. That was just a cool little touch there.
Yeah. And there's also there's a couple other key things in that Keen's Paul scene in which we talked about a little bit last time about how Leto and Gurney get a little prickly on the sire stuff. But there's this moment in which Paul says,
"I'm the Duke," Paul said. "I'm an Atreides. No Atreides has ever broken such a bond." Kynes swallowed. "When I say totally," Paul said, "I mean without reservation. I would give my life for you." "Sire," Kynes said, and the word was torn from him. But Jessica saw that he was not now speaking to a boy of 15, but to a man, to a superior. Now Kynes meant the word. In this moment he'd give his life for Paul, she thought. How do the Atreides accomplish this thing so quickly, so easily?
And so there's kind of this closing out of that whole titling thing that's hinted at before, which is that Paul is going to be the true Duke because he's able to express those qualities and get that sort of reverence from people without having to insist on it.
Yeah, I love that. So then this kicks off the second piece of Gurney Halleck being sort of blown away to the smugglers, falling in with that, him having to kind of try and take care of his men, but also to say, this is what I'm going to drive on. I'm going for revenge and I'll do whatever that takes. And this plot point, which I like a little bit less of this misdirection of Jessica being the betrayer and that being his, and we'll get to the resolution of that later on. But I did love the moment where one of the Atreides soldiers is dying and Gurney plays the song for him as he slips away. There's just a cool moment. I can't wait to see that in the film.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't know if they've ever really we talked about this last time too, but I think it's difficult to capture song in a book. I think you just don't quite get the same. You don't get that. I find it difficult to just read lyrics because I'm always well, what does it sound like? Is it a sad song? Is it happy? What is it? What is that? I don't know what a balisette sounds like. So I think you really need that portrayed in film in order to understand what what it means.
What did you make of the segment of the death of Liet? That's whole, the dialogue with his father and all that stuff.
I love that scene. I think that scene is great. And it's a great scene because it is all in someone's head. There's no really other character there. Mm-hmm. and you get a lot of detail. First of all, you get like a crucial piece of information, which is that you get like the understanding of the life cycle of the sandworm. You understand that there's this thing called like the sandfish or the sand trout or the little makers, which are like the pupa phase of the sandworm, and they contain water found in deep underneath the sand of the desert, and they hoard the water and like keep it from ever coming to the surface, and it kind of draws a circle around something that's alluded to earlier in book 1, which is that men found that if they dug wells, water would well up, but the wells would quickly go dry, and they don't understand why this is. Well, it's because there's actually this, sort of plant animal hybrid that's an early vector of the sandworm that's living under there. And that
just
part
that,
of what
that idea of a plant animal hybrid is a really wild idea.
And obviously that becomes like critical in books in the story of Dugalito 2 and the sequels. But it's like you kind of start to get something in there. So that's in this chapter. So there's lots of good myth making in this chapter. There's also the notion of the sand bloom, which is, the idea that there's sand that's being made by the little makers deep underneath. And then eventually it's exchanged for what's on the surface in this explosive thing, which is ultimately what kills Keynes in the scene. But so there's good kind of ecology in there, and like kind of world building. How does this whole thing work, and filling in some of the information about the desert. But there's also this really good thematic. There's a lot of good thematic stuff, but one of my favorite lines, I think one of the most important lines on the thematic tip, is in this chapter, which is Keynes's father says to him, as a ghost, he says, "No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero." And Keynes says, he's reading my lines. He's reading my mind. And he's worried about his death and Paul's ascendancy among the Fremen. And that notion of what does it mean for Paul to be the hero, this Messiah that the Fremen have been looking for, and how dangerous is that going to be for them, is, I think, as we've talked about before, like one of the more interesting themes in the book. And it's, it's the idea that like heroes can cause stagnation. There's this line that's like an epigraph, which is, Paul he fought the temptation to choose a clear, safe course, warning that path leads ever down to stagnation. The idea that like if you have this strong leader who can see presciently that you'll lead the human race into stagnation and ruin. Yeah, the whole epigram is maybe worth visiting. Just as a quote from the Princess Erland from Arrakis Awakening, and she says,
Muad'Dib could indeed see the future, but you must understand the limits of this power. Think of sight. You have eyes, yet cannot see without light. If you are on the floor of a valley, you cannot see beyond your valley. Just so, Muad'Dib could not always choose to look across the mysterious terrain. He tells us that a single obscure decision of prophecy, perhaps the choice of one word over another, could change the entire aspect of the future. He tells us, the vision of time is broad, but when you pass through it, time becomes a narrow door. And always, he fought the temptation to choose a clear, safe course, warning, that path leads ever down into stagnation.
This notion of the prescient hero and how the prescient hero is a real danger to humankind is like one of the central projects of the book. And so you get a good flavor of that in this Keynes death scene.
So they're able to get out. There's an exciting escape scene, and flying their thopter directly into the storm and navigating their way, and Paul being able to have touch with the using prescient as awareness as part of how he's steering the thopter, and he can feel the wind as it's buffeting it and figuring out how to make it right. They end up landing and make their way to a Fremen water catch and a Fremen sanctuary. And that's where they have the showdown with Stilgar, where they have to basically earn their way into the tribe. So we described it a little bit last week with Jessica just completely dominating Stilgar. But I love all of that, both her doing that, Paul immediately taking out Jameis, being able to escape and get up into the rock crevices, and then Chaney establishing herself as being tough as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great scene, and particularly I think you made the point like before, which is that this really establishes Jessica as this tremendous fighter, and just the part in which she kind of takes, and Stilgar is obviously the greatest fighter of the Fremen tribe that he leads, because that's how they choose their leader. And the Fremen are adversaries that are more fierce than the Sardaukar, which are the most scared warrior, most frightening warriors in the world. So Jessica can defeat the most frightening warrior that can defeat the most frightening warriors. We're talking about a lot of levels of badassery here. The paragraph in which her taking down a Stilgar is also a favorite of mine. Yeah. Because basically what happens is Stilgar says, look, we'll take you, Paul, into our tribe, but we got to kill your mom because she's not trained. She's not trained. She's a woman. She's not gonna, he says, there's nothing personal. It's just the way things work. And so Stilgar's explaining this, and then it goes, Jessica's motion started as a slumping, deceptive feint to the ground. It was the obvious thing for a weak off-worlder to do, and the obvious slows an opponent's reaction. It takes an instant to interpret a known thing when that thing is exposed as something unknown. She shifted as she saw his right shoulder drop to bring a weapon within the folds of his robe to bear on a new position. A turn, a slash of her arm, a whirling of mingled robes, and she was against the rocks with the man helpless in front of her. And it's just like, it's this great moment that then just expands, because Paul picks up on the cue that what his mom is doing, and it says as she attacked, he dove for the shadows, and he takes down Jameis with one chop and then runs for cover. And so it's this whole moment of intense action where you're like, okay, these people are super badasses, and we just haven't really seen that yet. I really love the way they kind of establish that, and it works too in the scene because it shocks the Fremen. They've never seen people with this kind of ability to control their bodies and their physical abilities so well, and so that's what earns them in their way into the tribe.
But I love the slumping shoulder.
The slumping shoulder is a key move.
Absolutely.
If you can bust out a slumping shoulder on someone, they'll never see it coming.
Exactly. Yeah. So I totally love that as well. So Paul, as they are getting adjusted, Paul begins to, he's ingesting spice in every meal and spice coffee and getting into the stuff. So he is really starting to get his prescient awareness coming on. And there is this nice moment, I think you alluded to this a little bit, this notion of Heisenberg's uncertainty,
right,
as he is viewing what's happening. It's also determining what's going to happen. And so I guess for me, a major theme is Paul does not seem free to make choices. He's constantly dealing with the fact that the wild jihad is coming, and we'll talk more about how that builds, but he does not feel like he has all the degrees of freedom. And most books of fiction don't ever make you question that, right? I'm the hero. I'm fighting the bad guys. You want me to win. That's it.
Yeah, totally. And the times in which he is not sort of hemmed in by his prescient awareness of the future, he talks about it as being in blind time. And generally those times are when his life is in danger. And so the choice is really well, am I going to continue to try to live here, or am I just gonna, or am I gonna be dead? And so this fight with Jameis is one of these scenes in which he doesn't know that there's definitely versions of the future in which he dies, and somehow the legend carries on even though he died. But to your point, he never really has a choice that's I can live and avoid the future that is to come. It's either I can help bring about the future that is to come, or my story ends here.
Right. So he rises to the occasion in terms of fighting Jameis. They did everything they could to avoid that fight. But Jameis, I think Jameis was really bummed after being bested by a boy and pride and all that stuff, and not wanting Stilgar allowing them to join the tribe was a break with tradition. That was a step, which is an important move for Stilgar to make. And Jameis is never able to accept that. So they fight. He is able to kill Jameis. And then they immediately have to turn around and deal with the funeral. So I love this. You talked about last week. I love the Jessica chastising Paul after the fight, to help prevent him from being hardened in that way. She wants to help soften the blow, and she does that by attacking him in a way that brings him up short. And Stilgar also joins in and helps to do a little bit of that attack. But they immediately shift to the funeral. And I love this funeral and this idea of, I'm a friend of Jameis and taking the thing. And Jessica reflects.
At her place in the circle across from Paul, Jessica nodded, recognizing the ancient source of the rite, and she thought, the meeting between ignorance and knowledge, between brutality and culture, it begins in the dignity with which we treat our dead.
Yeah.
So I was
That's good.
I was running around the lake listening to the audiobook when that scene came out. And I was just completely struck by that concept of like, when do we become humans, right? We had this question of the Gom Jabbar and humanity versus animal. What was the beginning of humanity? Was it 100,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago? And this notion of death and an idea of beginnings and ends as something that humanity could latch onto is really cool. So Paul has a realization in the midst of this that's super important, which is he says, even if I die right now, the jihad is going to happen regardless. It would either be my mother or, whoever. He would have to die, she would have to die, and all the Fremen that are there with him would have to die in order to prevent the jihad. So I'm kind of curious about that. He is essentially liberated, and also washed in some way for what's coming.
Yep. Yeah, there's this notion that that he can't avoid that somehow the jihad can't be avoided, even though that's his fundamental project is to try to avoid it.
So then we shift to awesome segment of the book, which is Fade's Duel. And so that starts with the Baron and Fenrik having a conversation, and it really exposes the brittle nature of the alliance, which is always, we didn't really talk about this last episode, so let's dig into this for a second. What is the entire concept of this plot? Like, why did the Harkonnens spend 60 years worth of profits of Arrakis in order to get the Duke in place so then they could pretend that they were turning it over and then kill him and then take it back? Why didn't they just go to war?
So there's, in this universe, there are balancing forces, and the three primary pillars are the Emperor and the power that he controls, the Spacing Guild, who controls all transportation, and then the Landsrat, which is the Council of Noblemen. And there's essentially this corporation, CHOAM, which awards directorships to the noble houses. And the Emperor controls something like 43%, like not a majority, but the plurality of the directorship. And his power, the Emperor's power, can only really be checked then by a banding together of the great houses against him. And what is alluded to in the setup is that the Emperor Corrino is worried that he's going to be challenged by the popularity of the Duke, that the Duke has a lot of sway with the other members of the Landsrat, and that should House Arrakis continue, or should House Atreides continue to accrue power and influence, that his future and his family's future and control of the throne might be threatened as well. So that's, I think, the seed of the plot that unites House Corrino and House Harkonnen to work together to undo and overthrow House Atreides.
I'm just wondering if there wasn't a simpler way to do it, but
yeah, no, there definitely was. I mean, there's there's hard to imagine a more complicated way than given the planet, which is he knows it's going to be a trap, but he'll go anyway, and then it really will be a trap, but not in the way that he thinks. And then you've got to work together with the Harkonnens, who are kind of shady. Yeah, no, it's not a great. I mean, it doesn't work either. It's not a great plan.
Yeah. It's not very exciting, but the correct answer was they just wait until Jessica has another daughter.
Right. And marry her to the throne.
And then marry her to Fade, and then you're done.
Right. Yeah. You do that, or, that would achieve it.
And get the key and get the Kwisatz Haderach at the same time.
They really should have had a better plan. Then there would be no book.
That's right. There would be no book. All right. So the Fade duel is so awesome, right? So the notion of the tri-cornered arena, and the Baron and the Fenrings doing their humming language, and the notion of the barbs and the two knives, white glove for poison and black glove for non-poison, and the notion of everyone knows that the slave is supposed to be treated in such a way that he can be easily defeated, and Fade subverts that as part of his trick. But then it's also I'm trying to remember, is it he's also the slave also is slightly affected from what he expected?
The slave the slave has training in him that it's not just the poison, but there's like he has a code word implanted, scum, right? That causes him to collapse. And so there's kind of a couple of different ways, a couple of different tricks that Fade has to make sure that he doesn't die at the hand of the slave. Which
Lady Fenring, after she seduces, she states she's going to, they don't actually show it, but she seduces him, she gets pregnant, and then she implants a subconscious control word in Fade, which then at the end of the book, Paul refuses to use.
Correct. That's right. So yeah, this notion of like subconscious control through verbal command is obviously a theme or like a motif throughout the book. It's a trick that the Bene Gesserit have. And yeah, you kind of see it at play here. I also love the description of when Fade is introduced in this chapter. It says, at the Baron's elbow walked Fade Routher.
His dark hair was dressed in close ringlets that seemed incongruously gay above sullen eyes. He wore a tight-fitting black tunic and snug trousers with a suggestion of bell at the bottom. Soft-soled slippers covered his small feet.
Soft-soled slippers covered his small feet. I'm like, wow, that is an outfit. Like that is that's a stylistic choice. And like, it's hard to like kind of think of that without thinking of just like, like 60s fashion or whatever. Like it's one of those like kind of, it shows its era, even though it's 35,000 years in the future or whatever.
Well, I'm going to go on record and say that I do not think the soft slippers are going to make it into the movie.
No, I'm not sure. I don't know if the bell bottoms are going to make it into the movie, either, but we can try.
Yeah. So it was a great fight, great scene. All of the notions of, Fade insists that this slave has the appropriate, as a worthy opponent, that he has appropriate burial, and that causes the Baron to have to trigger a fete for everybody to set the bloodlust of everyone. Like there's just so many cool aspects of that scene and the fallout of that.
Yeah, and there's a good scene. There's a good scene too between the Baron and the Count Fenrig, in which like Count Fenrig up until Count Fenrig basically appears as kind of like he's a eunuch. He's explicitly a eunuch, and is described as kind of being like a rabbit. Like seems very kind of unthreatening, but he has this very frank conversation with the Baron in which he's like, you better fucking get your shit done on Arrakis. He's like, this is not a joke. I'm here on behalf of the Emperor, and he gets approval on who your heir is. And I don't care what kind of deals you had before. You better get your shit done. And it's like, oh, okay, this is a serious dude. Fenrik is just, to me, one of the more fascinating characters because he's this total contradiction of threat and seeming non-threat, and he's both this killer assassin, but we never see him really do anything.
Right.
So it's a real nice. He's a great character.
Well, they talk about like feints, like he's moving his head one way and talking one way, but he's actually doing something in a completely different way. There's a description of it that is pretty awesome. So yeah, I can't wait to see what they do with him and how he gets filled out. I would love to see more story, and maybe that's in the prequels. Maybe Fenring is one of the folks that gets fleshed out.
Yeah.
So, cutting back to Arrakis from there, we have sort of adjusting to the Fremen ways in the Sietch, and Paul taking Hera. I love all the interactions with Paul taking Hera as his servant for a year, but also saying that she has a place with him as long as she's alive, raising her boys and accepting them as his part. And I really love the Water of Life scene, which includes the Fremen rave party, which like for this whole scene, when I was reading it this time, I was getting huge Zion vibes.
It is. It's obviously, I mean, that's what we talked about the first time, which is that some of the things that are established in this book, show up in science fiction science fiction for 50 years. And like the big one is this concluding scene of this book, of the second book, which is Jessica changing the water of life from the poison that would kill other people and then making it drinkable by the inhabitants of the Sietch. But in doing so, they go in this drug trance that causes them to have a shared consciousness. And basically it's it's an empathy drug. And they have a Zion rave. Like it's totally the scene from the second Matrix movie in which they are, together as a people fighting against their environment and against great odds. And yet they have this, real earthy, kind of sensual moment as a tribe. Yeah.
So, I mean, we can't just let it hang out there. Please give me your rating on The Matrix Reloaded.
Oh, I am a strong believer that the second Matrix movie is the best Matrix movie. That the second Matrix movie is by far the superior movie to the first one.
Yes.
The first movie I got really frustrated with when it came out because there was this whole conceit, which is like, you can't be told what the Matrix is. You have to like see it for yourself. And like that was both supposed to be true within the context of the movie, but it was also supposed to be true as like an audience goer, that like, this is going to be such a concept that you've never, you're never going to believe what's going on in this movie. But like, if you're familiar with science fiction at all, it's like, no.
Right.
Well, this is a trope. Like the world is a simulation. Yes. Like, they can be explained in 4 words, like one sentence. The second, and like similarly, the first movie also just traffics. I mean, it's obviously a classic, but like it traffics in a lot of tropes, which are, there's a chosen one. He's come to save us. He has special powers. He's been foretold in prophecy.
Wow. This seems slightly familiar.
Yeah. All the classic stuff. The killer thing about the second movie, is it throws that all out the window. And in the second movie, it establishes that, in fact, Neo is not the one, even though his name is an anagram of that. He is just one of many versions of the one that have existed as they've run this simulation over and over again. And
like the fourth or something?
The seventh or something. Yeah, whatever. The notion that there's going to be a savior or a messiah is an intrinsic part of the simulation because it's part of the system of control that they use. And once they get to that point, it's like time to reboot the whole thing and they start over with a new seed population.
Hello, Neo. Your life is the sum of a remainder of an unbalanced equation inherent to the programming of the Matrix. You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision. While it remains a burden assiduously avoided, it is not unexpected and thus not beyond a measure of control.
And that concept to me of throwing out the Messiah myth, saying that Neo actually isn't special, it's part of a greater design, that is actually revolutionary. Like that is a real cool idea. And so to me, it establishes the second movie as like both thematically and kind of stylistically the great movie. It also has like the multiple, like just from an action movie standpoint, it has like the many Smiths fight and all that stuff. So it's a real winner. And then the third movie basically throws all that out. The third movie says actually never, like kind of like actually Neo is the last one and like he's going to end this whole thing. And so to me, the third one's the bummer, but the second one is clearly the best. So that's my hot take.
All right. Well, I totally agree with that hot take. And
nice.
And it's
we're the two people.
We're the only ones, which is fine. We're the ones in this instance. But to me, like you have all the time in the first movie where they're like, we have to get away from the Sentinels. They can't find out where Zion is. And it's like, they built Zion. They populated Zion. They know where they know where you are. They know everything that's going on. None of this is a surprise.
You are here because Zion is about to be destroyed. Its every living inhabitant terminated, its entire existence eradicated. Bullshit. Denial is the most predictable of all human responses. But rest assured, this will be the 6th time we have destroyed it. and we have become exceedingly efficient at it.
So
Right.
yeah, that subversion to me is absolutely brilliant. And even though the architect is slightly clunky and in the delivery and slightly weird, I absolutely love that subversion.
I love that.
It's brilliant.
People shit on the architect scene, with the multiple screens. And to me, that is one of the best scenes in movie science fiction. I've watched that scene so many times of just like, oh shit, there's like some real stuff going on in here. Like they're really, and like, it's a little, and like, I guess people would kind of critique it as maybe it's a tell, not show. But it's so stylized, like it's not literal. I think it's a really great scene, not just for the series, but in science fiction generally. So I defend it to the death.
Oh, well, you can't show what they're doing, right? Like it has to be tell in that instance,
Right.
because it is such a deep subversion of the entire thing. And yeah, totally agree with you that the subversion is the most important thing, and the fight scene in the chalet, on the bridge, or on the highway that they built in Emeryville.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like the best. I mean, that whole sequence in Matrix 2 that goes from the chalet through the highway scene.
Yes.
Is like, I forget how long it is, but it's like 20 minutes or something like that of just nonstop action in all different forms of like close up, big scenes, exploding shit, martial arts, like whatever, someone fighting with a seatbelt. I mean, there's stuff that's not great. Like the albino Rastas, we didn't really need just as like a style.
But that's part of the concept of there's ghosts, werewolves, and vampires, and like they're kind of like bringing in some fun genre stuff to play with it.
I'm fine with the idea of bringing in ghosts, vampires, and werewolves. I just didn't need it to be like Chet Hanks, like big up yourself, and like that whole world of just like albino reggae is not really a good look for anyone. So I would have gotten rid of that, but I love the idea of bringing in anything that's not Chet Hanks derivative.
Are we adding the Matrix Reloaded to our podcast here?
Well, I feel we've covered it. It's the greatest of the three, and that's what people should know. I also have a hot take that Alien 3 is the best of the Alien movies. So, listen, that's more controversial.
Hey, listen, it's been great. Thanks a lot. We'll see you.
We'll end it there.
All right. So speaking of threes, we're on to book 3. So let's get started. So the first note I have for book 3 is this awesome scene with the Baron and Fade.
Yeah.
Fade attempts an assassination plot of the Baron by taking one of his pleasure boys and putting a poison dart on embedding it in his thigh, right where the Baron likes to put it, his hand. And so Thufir warns the Baron so the Baron doesn't die. The Baron kills the boy and then calls Fade in and basically tears him a new one. What was your take on that?
I like the whole like plot within plot and like Fade trying to kill the Baron, that whole thing. I think it does, just like sort of calling out something that I don't think has aged particularly well. The notion of like the one gay male character in the book being like the absolute arch villain who's like a creepy rapist is not like super chill.
Right.
And so I don't love that choice. And this is the scene that kind of does the most with it. And so that's my one note. That's my one note on that scene. But I mean, like the idea of Fade trying to like, it also, I think, kind of establishes that Fade and the Baron are not as good of plotters as like other people in the story. Like it seems like their plots are like Thufir's pulling some strings, but their stuff seems pretty easily seen through. Like they're just kind of not up for the task of competing against the Kwisatz Haderach.
I think to me, Thufir in the book is one of the most underused characters.
Totally.
I definitely found myself like I wanted to know what was he thinking, what was his plan, what was his prime projection of what was happening. Would have loved to see a lot more of him.
And the Lynch movie does a great job of making Thufir into like a much more compelling character. I mean, I think a lot about the scene in which Thufir is in the War Council with Duke Leto Atreides, and he like does some kind of mental math or whatever and like talks about some matrices. Like he basically does some matrix algebra. He takes the discriminant of something and like, and it's just like, whoa, whatever my guy is doing is intense. And he's got those great eyebrows also. So he's much more compelling. I agree. He's kind of wasted in the book.
Him milking the cat is just...
That is, I mean, I mentioned this last time, how there's things that are not in the book. And like one of the things when I read the book, I was like, okay, I'm going to finally understand. Because I saw that scene, the scene in the movie in which is in the book, that Thufir's being poisoned with the slow release poison.
Yeah.
And that's how the Harkonnens keep him under control. But in the movies, Lynch is like, the way this is going to work is there's going to be a rat strapped to a cat, and Thufir's got to milk the rat cat pair in order to stay alive. And it's like so quickly done, and you just see the setup briefly, and you're just like, wait, what with the cat? And I was like, okay, I got to read the book to get to the bottom of this. And like, there's no cat milking at all in the book. That is,
where's my cat milking?
That is really that is David Lynch. Just no one better.
Yeah.
Just no one better.
Yeah. I can't wait to get there. That's going to be a good one. Paul feeling super unanchored in time. This was something you talked about a little bit ago. But definitely this notion. I like the description of prescient awareness as him remembering the future as his past. That's a really cool idea. And him, this notion of feeling unanchored and trying to figure out where he is. But that doesn't prevent him from getting in and calling a worm. I definitely was kind of surprised at how nervous he was, given the fact that all the Fremen call worms and ride and all that stuff. Like that felt a little weird to me, the fact that he was so kind of hesitant and stressed out about that. But
well, I think there are just these moments that he can't see through. And so he every time he encounters one, it's like, oh, this is like how he could die. I do love all the religiosity of the scene where they call the worm. You get a lot of like, sort of hints into the Fremen religion. Like what happened to them before they came to Arrakis. Like there's this line like, they denied us the Hajj, Stilgar said with ritual solemnity. As Chani taught him, Paul responded, who can deny a Fremen the right to walk or ride where he wills? And like, there's this like notion that like, there are these Zen Sunni combination of like Zen Buddhist and Muslim warrior, tribesmen who've like traveled from planet to planet and faced these tremendous hardships and purges, and are now like, on Arrakis, and this is where they're going to stand. And it's really well compressed, and I think creates an interesting culture. I read an interesting article because I think here maybe is a good place to talk about how much of this feels like religious appropriation versus like not. And I think you could definitely make the argument that I think the argument, should be made that this runs into some of the same problems that Lawrence of Arabia runs into, T. Lawrence runs into in Lawrence of Arabia, which is there's this foreign people that needs a white savior to come, a white messiah to come and save them. And the sort of exoticism of their religion and their culture is kind of performed for a white audience. I think that critique is valid, but I also think, and I read sort of a critique from a Muslim critic who appreciated that this portrayal of of parts of his culture seemed like it wasn't actually Muslim culture. It was some science fiction take on it, but there were enough parts of it that seemed true that it was like, oh, like I can actually see something of myself and my own traditions in this. And obviously that's not for me to sort of say whether that's in or out, but I do think you get into something here, which is that there's an attempt to create a richness of culture and a richness of ritual by Herbert in the context of the Fremen. That to me is obviously one of the things that's most interesting about the book.
Yeah, for me as a 13-year-old fundamentalist Christian growing up in Florida, going to Whitechapel Church of God, Assembly of God, private school, Warner Christian Academy, like I didn't get clearly what was happening. And I don't think my mind would have fully comprehended the concept that in the future, a dominant religion for spanning this culture would have not been Christianity.
Right.
And there's something to me that's super interesting. Like they refer to the military leaders as Bashars.
Right.
And that's not within the Fremen. That's within the Imperium. So there's a notion here. Like I'm kind of curious is the assertion that essentially some form of Islam has basically become the dominant religion through mergers and various other things, but it's sort of like come together, and Islam has become a fundamental element of society.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the things that's so interesting about, because of the time period this book came from, is that Western culture's understanding of Islam in the 60s is so different than, where we are now. And it's unburdened by, sort of like, the past 50 years of, sort of imperial conflict with the Middle East. Obviously, bad shit happened in the Middle East before 1964 as well. But
sure.
Like from a U.S. perspective, it's less burden. And so even the use of the word jihad is less laden than it would be in the 80s or the 90s or now. And so I think there's something in here. I like hearing about your experience there, because there is something that's like, oh, okay. Like, there's like this religious tradition that's just become like the dominant religious tradition in the world. And it's like somehow merged with other things. And this is a spoiler, obviously, but like the one case where that's not true in the Dune universe is that there's still I'm Jewish, like regular Jews hanging out there in the Dune universe.
Until book 6.
Just untouched by the interceding like 35,000 years, just still like, making latkes for Hanukkah or whatever. Yeah. That part cracks me up. But otherwise, like it has this very like kind of, like everything's been merged together in a way that's interesting and unclear.
I got very nervous in book 6 when that thread came up.
When the Jews show up? It's a little scary.
I was like, man, please be careful. Like,
I think it was pretty good. I don't remember him actually stepping in it, to be honest. Like to me, and we'll have to go back there when we get to book 6, but like I was very nervous. It's like, oh God, don't make them all like merchants or something. Right. Like, like it's, I
think it worked out okay. So it definitely, I love that, like the scene right after this is where literally it's Ramadan. And so you have this incredible moment where Jessica and Aaliyah are holding hands and they're reliving these memories of being attacked on these other worlds, and the blood is flowing. And I don't know, that was so cool to have that tradition of the Fremen, and just the idea in general of having this notion of ancestral memory and being able to pass on. It seems very impractical. Paul makes a reference to having 1 billion lives to pull, information from. And I don't know how you could ever sort through that in a realistic time frame and still maintain any idea of consciousness as a discrete entity. But it's certainly a cool idea.
Also introduced in Aaliyah is also introduced in that chapter,
right?
Which is obviously a very important moment. The introduction of Aaliyah, later Saint Aaliyah of the Knife, the second born of Leto and Jessica, who was in the womb when Jessica took the water of life, and therefore became was preborn into consciousness and became sort of self-aware and had the knowledge of these ancestors when she was a fetus, which is not what you want. It turns out that's not a positive in child rearing.
Probably would sleep pretty well through the night.
I think you'd get really lucky on the sleep training and also the potty training.
That's right. I know how to do this.
but then they become a murdering psychopath. So some side effects.
That's a downside. I did love the interaction. So in that scene is great. You've got Aaliyah and Hera, Paul's servant, Jameis's former wife, who Aaliyah calls Ghanima, which is really cool because there's a callback to that for Children of Dune. And I just love all of their interactions, the two of them. There's something very loving and sweet about their relationship. So I thought that was super cool.
And there's also this cool notion, like Jessica is given a coffee and she was just thinking like, oh, a coffee would be nice. And there's this notion that like within the Sietch, because they're all like kind of spiced up all the time, they have like kind of an ambient awareness, even though if they're not like Kwisatz Haderach or Reverend Mothers, they have like kind of an ambient awareness of each other that is beyond, human, that is supernatural in some way.
So, but this is an interesting point, though. So she does say that there is kind of like a joined mind. It's not telepathy, but she says the Fremen reject what they can't understand and don't have the same spice awareness that she has through her training.
Right.
And that they have an instinctual alignment, but they don't have that deeper level. But it's definitely a fascinating idea of this sort of semi-joined mind.
Yep.
We could use more of that for sure.
Yeah, it'd be helpful.
All right. So Paul gets the
worm,
the great grandfather of all worms, and does a decent job. Again, Stilgar lectures him on he didn't do it right and he wasn't standing in the right place, and is constantly kind of giving him the check. But you also have this notion that this is how Stilgar is processing the fact that his own members of his Sietch are now clamoring that they have to fight. Paul must, by Fremen tradition, must challenge Stilgar because that's the way it works. It has to be done. And basically, Stilgar's religious and legal training and this concept of fusing those two things for the ultimate power do not allow him to consider another option.
Right. I mean, to me, I felt this got built up just a little too much. Like this idea that Paul was going to kill Stilgar, to me, maybe because I just knew it was never going to happen when it came time to read the book, but it just never seemed like something that was actually going to happen. It was just he's going to find a way out of it. Now it is funny that his way out of it is essentially to say look, I'm not going to kill Stilgar because I don't have fucking time to run the Fremen. I'm going to be emperor of the universe. You think I've got time to run a siege? I've got way bigger plans at work here. And so that's it's a little dickish. It's a convenient way out. He basically ends up saying I'm not going to kill Stilgar because I'm significantly more important than the chief of the Fremen.
But it is it's like a 40K zoom out, right? In 40K, you have squad based combat happening, but if you pull back, you see this massive, battle that's happening and things unfolding all across the galaxy. And I think the Fremen, until encountering Paul, are not capable of taking that kind of view. The most that they can do, and actually it's more maybe than we're doing right now, is to say, how do we make this planet better over the course of the next couple generations? But they're not, they just don't see that broader scope.
Yep, that's true. Paul does have this larger plan at work that encompasses the Fremen plan, but is significantly broader than that. Although it's worth asking there, what is his broader plan? What does he actually want besides the survival of his family? He's adopted the Fremen mission because he is now Fremen and wants the greening of Arrakis that's consistent with the fulfillment of that prophecy. But what is his design for the universe except to avoid the jihad? What is his positive mission except for to avoid the jihad, destroy the emperor and destroy the Baron? Because I mean, he doesn't have what is his message as a political figure? right. He doesn't seem to. He's just, we know what he's against, but what is he for? That's right. And I don't really know the answer to that.
No, they don't give it. It is not specified in this book what his larger vision is, other than revenge, and it's questionable the extent to which he buys into the greening of Dune as a goal and end in itself versus a means of control for the Fremen to enable him to execute his plan.
Yeah, I don't really think he cares. I think he's fine with it. He's also he's totally willing, as another plan, to destroy all spice production and all spice on Arrakis if he didn't get his way.
Right.
He would have released the so-called water of death and destroyed, all spice production on the planet, which he uses as, kind of a mutually assured deterrent. But it's not clear to me that he really cares about the greening of Arrakis in and of itself. It's just a means of control, as you say.
Yeah, agree. So Paul, he, in the midst of becoming a sandwriter, he decides he's going to go see the family. He's going to go south, 20 thumpers, and on his way down there, and he's going to really make the family a priority in that moment. On the way, they see the smugglers.
Right.
And that's when he says, all right, we got to divert and we got to figure out what's going on with these smugglers. And we need to let's lay a trap and let's catch these folks.
Brief aside, they mention a couple times that the journey south would be a 20 thumper jump or a 20 thumper journey. What do we think that means? Like, I mean, obviously a thumper is how you call a sandworm. Do you think it means that because like the sandworm gets tired after a while, they'd have to call 20 worms in order to get there?
Yes.
All right.
So they would say basically most would be able to ride for like, I think 12 hours. Okay. And so it's like a 10-day ride, but the one that Paul calls goes like 4 days.
Because it's so big.
Because it's so big and strong or whatever. So it goes a lot further than they expected.
It's like 500 meters long or something like
right.
that. It's like a giant. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they cast the net, or they get ready. Then you switch perspectives to Gurney. And so it's great to see that Gurney's still alive and how he's, adjusting to being a smuggler. The trap is sprung by the Fremen and they are just utterly demolished.
Right.
But I love the Gurney and Paul reunion. Like, it's just great to see the two of them together and the excitement they have, but also what has changed. And specifically the call out that Gurney, when he sees Paul, is reminded of the old Duke, not Leto, but Leto's father, who was like the hard-edged, ruthless ruler. And Gurney can already really clearly see that is happening.
Yeah, love that. Love the reunion with Gurney. The only downside to the reunion with Gurney is that Gurney is under the impression that Jessica is the traitor that ended up killing the Duke and not Yui. And so Gurney is like on this revenge mission where he's going to try to take out Jessica in order to avenge the death of the Duke, which is just a terrible plan by Gurney. Like, obviously it was never going to work.
It's a bad plan, but it's a bad narrative structure because we as the audience already are fully aware that that's not the case. You end up just thinking Gurney is a dum-dum and, why can't he figure this out? And of course, one element that is interesting is the crisis of the moment. That's where Paul realizes that he hasn't seen any vision where Gurney is a threat. And this is the moment that causes him to realize that he should try the waters of life. Yeah. And he is realizing that his spice consumption is getting to the point where his prescient awareness is being dulled. And so he's got to really jump it up and go for it.
I think that's a really good point. I'd forgotten that this was sort of the catalyst for that the fact that he hadn't seen this moment is what he's like, I can't possibly be this blind again. I have to take the water of life.
That's right.
That is a key catalyst in this scene.
The scene itself is intense and cool in some respects, but it's just you're a little bit like, come on, we should be through this. So I also wanted to call out really quick. I love the scene where there's undercover Sardaukar in the smuggler community. There's like 10 of them, and the Fremen basically cut them to pieces when they try to escape. And I just love the way that Paul handles them, and also the notion that they have false toenails and teeth and sugar wire in their hair. And
like they can make like a transceiver with like stuff hidden in their butt or whatever. Like they're really like, they're on it. They're key commandos.
That was pretty awesome. All right. So as we barrel to the towards the end here, we got a couple key points left. So there is this great moment where Jessica, after this showdown with Gurney, she apologizes for controlling Paul, and she basically pleads for him to choose his own path. She says, marry Cheney, make her your wife, and live a life and be happy. And there was a moment, I forget, I had it in my notes somewhere, where Paul had this vision and sees a notion of he and Cheney living in the desert in peace, which is, not to be had.
Yep. There's some description earlier about how like mad Paul is at his mom, that he like views her as like his true enemy, which I think is like kind of critical to understanding sort of the way in which he evolves to kind of agree to take the water of life.
All right, so give me your water of life take. That's the next piece. He's in a trance for 3 weeks. They call Cheney, Jessica calls Cheney to come to see if she can try and get him out of it. He's been basically catatonic. What's your take on his awareness and kind of what happens as he comes out?
First of all, I love calling her Cheney, like Dick Cheney, because it makes me think that she's just going to like accidentally shoot her best friend in the face with a shotgun. And then second of all, I think it's funny that in this scene, they sort of skip ahead. Like the actual taking of the water of life happens off screen or whatever. Like it doesn't, you jump from him deciding he has to do it. And then it's 3 weeks later and he's been in a trance for 3 weeks, but we missed the whole, thing. Whereas in the movie, the Lynch movie, like Paul taking the water of life is like a whole 2001, go through the Stargate experience of like, okay, like you're going to see some shit now.
And it was also expected, right? It wasn't like a realization that he had. It was like, this is the thing that you have to try. They actually don't establish how the Bene Gesserit tested for, I mean, maybe it was whatever their process is. I can't remember how different. There's a scene in book 5, I think, book 5 or book 6, where they show someone becoming a Reverend Mother with a Bene Gesserit, and like something's injected into their mouth, and then they have this horrible agony.
Right.
So I guess it's a similar enough.
Yeah, I mean, I like the notion that he. It's interesting. I mean, we talked about this before, that like actually the taking of the water of life and the becoming of the Kwisatz Haderach happens relatively late in the book, even though it's like this critical transformation for him. And so it's really, it happens on page 718 or something like that, like of an 800 page book. Like, so it's really kind of put towards the end. And it's not, I guess it's not super clear. He already had these prescient visions, and he still has blind spots even after this. Like when we get to the climax of the book, he doesn't know if he's going to live through the duel with Fade. So he's changed, but he's not changed completely. I think is a key takeaway that I had from the Water of Life scene.
Yeah. Also, just the notion of it's all about the giving force versus the taking force.
Yeah, there's this key notion of the yin yang of this Taoist concept of that the reason why the women Bene Gesserit are unable to look inward is because it's the source of the taking energy, this male energy that they're unable to access. I think it's interesting that like there's this notion in the book that like the inward source that the Kwisatz Haderach is able to access is black or obscure or murky to other people, because this is this real Taoist notion. One thing I was looking into is the idea that Frank Herbert and Alan Watts were contemporaries in the 60s in Northern California, and they were friends. Like they at least had dinner together a few times on Alan Watts's famous houseboat in Sausalito. And there's this so I was rereading like the way of Zen to kind of refamiliarize myself with what Herbert might have been thinking with some of his Zen, like Zen Sunni warrior themes in the book. And one of the things that's in there in the first chapter in The Way of Zen, which is about Taoism, is this notion that in Taoism, unlike in Western religion, the notion of Tao is this dark, obscure, black, has those qualities as opposed to the qualities of the creator in Western religion, which is, light and transparent and it's, a force that knows itself. And so there's this quote from Alan Watts quoting Sasaki, where he says, "There is one thing, above it supports heaven, below it upholds earth. It is black like lacquer, always actively functioning." This is a description of the Tao. And then Watts goes on to say himself, he says, "The darkness is a metaphorical darkness, the sheer inconceivability which confronts the mind when it tries to remember the time before birth to penetrate its own depths, to penetrate the mind's own depths." So this is a pretty direct description of what Herbert is talking about when the Reverend Mothers are unable to look inward and they confront this darkness, this impenetrable understanding, which is where, you're unable to observe the mind working itself. So that was That was a fun finding from the Zen Sunni side of things in the book.
Yeah, and just generally spice flowing in the late 60s in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, there's a lot of spice in the Bay Area. There's some good supply back then.
All right, so we have Shaddam is here. There's a reference to the guild has lowered space fares so that all of the sort of like minor houses can load up and put troops and show up, sort of bring in force. Although there is the notion very quickly that they don't actually grant landing privileges to anybody, but they at least get people to get on board their ships and get over there. But it is a full show of power of the Harkonnens and the Emperor. And I just love the idea of these massive ships landing on the platform fields and having the chome banners waving as this huge storm is brewing. And there's this cool moment where Paul has released the Sardaukar prisoners back to the Emperor, and he is giving the Emperor one last chance. If he will understand what happened, understand that Paul is Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib is the Atreides heir, and then just raise the Atreides flag, then we can all be happy and go home, except for the Harkonnens, so they could settle it themselves. But no, the Emperor raises the Chome flag, not the Harkonnen flag, who he has now said is in charge, but the Chome flag. So he is definitely covering all bets at this point, the Emperor, but he has no idea for where things are going to go.
Yep. It's basically, the scene that like the Emperor thinks it's going to be pretty easy to wipe out the resistance here, but he's hedging his bets, and like basically every power in the universe has come to kind of check out what's going to happen, is basically there for the show.
So part of the reason why the Emperor, I think, is feeling confident is because he's able to send an attack force that goes and attacks one of the Sietches, and Aaliyah is captured, and Paul's son, Leto, is killed in the raid. And there's this heavy moment where Paul is reflecting on it and says something inside him chuckled and rubbed his hands at the notion of that pain and suffering that he is having. Some previous life or something is kind of rattling around there. But he's not the only one who is in pain. So the Baron basically gets called down in front of Shaddam, who just tears him a new one and, essentially says that he's a complete incompetent fool, but also accuses him of being in league with Leto, and that the whole thing was a setup. There was never that really battle, because he can't imagine that the Baron is so incompetent that he could have sort of wrecked everything that was going on Arrakis. That's right.
The Baron basically becomes completely defanged in this scene, and as sort of like he was never the real threat. And then he's pretty quickly dispatched by a child. So it's an unceremonious end for the big bad of the book heretofore.
Yeah, but I love Aaliyah in these scenes. Like,
so great.
She just like tears up everybody. The Reverend Mother is completely overwhelmed and loses it. She's totally disrespectful for the Emperor. I loved all that.
No fucks from Aaliyah. She is 6 years old and gives no fucks. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Emperor's ship is damaged. So instantly they're on lockdown. They can't escape. All their plans to be able to get in and get out if there are problems are blown away. And the guildsmen are just sort of like staying cool. They want to see what happens. They're very nervous. They don't have visibility into the time nexus to see what's going on with Paul. So they're just sort of holding on. The Emperor reaches out to say, summon Fenrik. He's got to have something there. But Paul returns to Leto's tower back in Arrakeen and reestablishes Atreides' ownership of that. And he's sort of assessing what's happened in the battle. And immediately Gurney is really distressed by the fact that Paul is more concerned about what equipment and ships and things were lost than what happened to the people that were affected.
Yeah, and I think you kind of get the sense in this scene that Paul is pretty eyes on the prize focused here. Like, he sees the completion of his project at hand, and he's not really going to be distracted from by anything, including like the death of his child. Like he's going to carry through and achieve what he was meant to do. And so this, I think, is where you kind of get that, like, you know, you get the fulfillment of the most dangerous thing as a hero, because he's had no choice now but to kind of fully assume the mantle of the hero, and that's meant that he's put aside all of these more human concerns.
Right. So let's see. This is a weird moment. He has a memory inside his cognition that Aaliyah placed there, where she lets him know that she's killed the Baron, and that she's fucking around, you know, taking out Harkonnens and whatnot. And she specifically says that I just did something that even you can't do,
which is place this message. Yeah.
And no other description or whatever of that. That's just, I don't know.
Yeah, that some other power that gets that one is a little bit curious. I mean, I have a lot of questions about sort of how the Aaliyah powers work in general, because there's this notion that she can access her past memories, but then it also is more than she's accessing the past memories. She's actually
in dialogue.
She's conversing with those entities as though they exist still within her. And then
that's established for Reverend Mothers, though, that for the Bene Gesserit as well. They do that. They have dialogues with their past Reverend Mother lives whose memories they carry. They still have personas inside them.
Right. But then to like go from that to I can somehow use my, like, is that Aaliyah exists within Paul's consciousness because he also has access to that power. And so she can somehow, as the entity that lives within him, plant some kind of message. I mean, it's some kind of weird, double handshake, you know, secret key.
Yeah, it's a connection. It's like folding space, right? Folding consciousness. Somehow she's able to put something there, but
I mean, it's cool. I don't quite get it.
No, I didn't get it. I didn't get it either. Paul looks around and he notices that all the Fremen are now treating him with a holy sense, even Gurney and Stilgar, and he's really kind of disappointed that they no longer look at him as Paul. He is only Muad'Dib now, and same thing with Jessica. She sees, that he's changed. She says that he once said that he wasn't the Kwisatz Haderach, and he replies and says he can't deny that anymore. There are no innocent anymore.
Right. That's right. There's no innocent anymore. Yeah,
but he has become that religion.
He's become the religion, and everyone is there now to be judged.
So this is the reference that I had with the quote by the Guild and Paul saying that their clear, safe course always leads down to stagnation. Mm-hmm. But so now we begin the 3 challenges that you talked about on the last episode. So the first one is Thufir.
Yeah, the first one is Thufir. Thufir is set up by the Harkonnen with a poison knife to kill Paul, and Paul knows that. It's like transparent to everyone, but Paul's take is that if Thufir needs him to die, that he's willing to die for Thufir, which I don't really know why he would offer that up to Thufir, except that he knows that it's not going to happen. But that's like sort of that's like one of his sort of offerings to Thufir, who himself is also dying in this moment because he's been cut off from the poison that in the book is not a cat rat poison.
I guess that's maybe like a St. Peter reference, right? You'll deny me 3 times or something, like Paul really puts himself at his mercy. Right.
He says, like, he knows, it's like, he basically knows, like, you're the one, I know that you're the one that's going to betray me. So go ahead and do it if you're going to do it.
You broke my heart.
You broke my heart, Fredo.
So
Judas.
So Thufir, I had forgotten this, even having reread it, and so rereading it this afternoon, I forgot that Thufir dies. That he basically pricks his own hand, and then immediately dies, and so that was it for Thufir. And there is this great kind of like in the framing, I love it. Paul says, "I'm not sitting with my back to the door anymore," and Thufir says, "The universe is full of doors."
I know. That was actually a kind of a sweet little exchange.
All right, so that was battle 1. So battle 1A is the Guild sort of steps up and they try and get in Paul's face, and he basically just utterly dismisses them, says that he's
Right.
going to destroy all spice on Arrakis immediately, and they can look inside the Nexus and see that they are totally screwed if they mess with him at all, and they absolutely back down and back off.
Yeah, that's like a 1A. That's not even like a fight. That's just, he's like, the guild, you thought you were running shit. You're not running anything. I'm running things.
That's right. Okay, so fight 2 is Fade.
Fight 2 is Fade, who has been well established as a great fighter. And he is going to be the one to take down Paul because he's able to challenge him under the rules of Canley, and say like, look, our house is at war. We're the head of our 2 houses. Like, let's take this to the street and settle it once and for all. Which, no one, like Gurney's like, why would you, Gurney's like, you promised me I was the one that got to do this. And now you're taking that away from me to put your own life at risk. And Paul is like, yep, that's pretty much how it's going to go. I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is, Gurney, you're going to get Caladan after this is over, but.
Right. And also probably get to hook up with my mom.
Yeah.
But, there's strict rules for Canley. Sorry, Gurney.
So the fight is pretty awesome, right? The description of the fight, I definitely, when I read this in 83, was very captivated by all this and the whole concept of like the knife switching hands, and maybe that was the Jameis fight, but just I love all of the hand to hand. It's very simple in this giant, elegant, advanced, complex society. It comes down to knife fights.
Yeah, well, the great thing in the Fade fight is that we've had a couple knife fights at this point, and one of the things that's established is like that when you fight without shields. If you're trained in fighting with shields, there's this slowness that happens.
Right.
And Paul believes that he perceives that Fade has this slowness, that he's used to fighting with shields, and that therefore his timing is off. But in fact, Fade is feinting that slowness. And so there's a lot of good stuff like that. That's like, and it really establishes that Fade is the most credible fighter that Paul has faced so far. It's, he's a real problem and someone that could definitely kill him.
So it's interesting because there's the personal nature of this. So the Marvel movies have made approximately $45 billion at this point, but out of all of them, Winter Soldier is my favorite. And the notion of like the knife fights that come down to the Winter Soldier versus the Black Widow, it's awesome, including Bucky, dropping the knife and switching handholds in the midst of it. It's just, there's something very personal and intense about it. So it's
like, or like the Bourne fights, right? Like the Bourne fights where it's like him with a magazine against a guy with a pen, like, or whatever, it's like very intimate and visceral, like personal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's good. These are good fights.
So Paul cannot see what's going to happen. He doesn't have prescience. He doesn't know that there's a poison dart at the hip, but he is able to have his reactions be good, and he is able to drive the knife home and take. Oh,
that's another feint within the feint, is that he detects that there's something hidden in the left side of Fade's girdle, but in fact, Fade is feinting as though it's on the left side, but it's actually on the right side. So Paul, the knife, like it's the same thing as the final switch.
Yeah,
the final feint within the Fade.
Right.
Yeah, the Fade feint.
That's it. And so that's it. So Fade goes down. That's it for him. So finally, the Emperor is left with no other recourse but turns to Fenrik, his best friend for his whole life.
And Fenrik, it's been established, is like a would-be Kwisatz Haderach. He was bred to be a potential Kwisatz Haderach, but because he ended up being a eunuch, he was not able to be that. And he's also, because of this quality, someone that Paul has no prescient vision of. Like, he appears as like someone that like Paul had never considered before. He's like, he shows up and Paul's like, who the hell is this guy? I've never seen him anywhere before. He's invisible to Paul's vision, and yet also quickly established as someone that could kill Paul. Like, he is capable of doing it. Like, Paul is tired from a long effort of fighting Fade, and that even if he wasn't, it's established that Fenrik could kill Paul on his best day, which is kind of a crazy concept.
So what's your take on that? Like, that's an interesting assertion to make, that he believes it, he knows it to be the case. Are we meant to accept that as he is correct?
I mean, we're meant to accept it because there's this line that says, Paul, aware of some of this from the way the time nexus boiled, understood at last while he had never seen Fenrik along the webs of prescience. Fenrik was one of the might have beens. And he says, a deep compassion for the Count flowed through Paul, the first sense of brotherhood he had ever experienced. And right after that, Fenrik, reading Paul's emotion, said, Majesty, I must refuse. So it kind of establishes in that pretty short section that yes, Fenrik definitely could kill him. Like, the book gives us no reason to doubt that that is true, even though it seems impossible. And that we also believe that Paul believes that this is true because he's this kind of special, almost superhuman. And so, yeah, it kind of exists as this, what might have been, but didn't happen at the end of the book.
Yeah, my last note here is about that, Paul having that sense of brotherhood, and he doesn't have siblings, right? Other than Aaliyah, he's grown up on his own, and by the time Aaliyah is in, they're separated for most of their lives. So that's a powerful thing to have that notion of brotherhood.
Yep.
So he refuses. Paul wins. As you said last week, Paul burns everything down and takes control and takes ownership. He basically takes all of the Emperor's Chom holdings, which to some extent is almost irrelevant because at this point he now has complete control over spice production on Arrakis, and therefore he essentially controls the universe. He takes Princess Irulan as his wife, but not to his bed. And is going to keep Chani as his woman. He gives Stilgar directorship of Arrakis. He gives his mother and Gurney control of Caladan. So Paul kind of executes this flawless victory. And the denouement on this book is like one page. There's no tomorrow, a month from now, a year from now. It's literally just he won, the end.
And that's I think, again, where the Lynch movie has this great invention, which is that the ending of the Lynch movie is that it rains.
Right.
I mean, of course, that's what should happen at the end of the book. The whole idea is that there's this transformative change that's coming to the planet. Show that. But of course, in the book, they save that. They save that notion for, to be established in a longer time period.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is Dune, the book.
Dune, the book.
Next week, we have our first departure from Herbert, and we're going to be tackling Blade Runner 2049, directed by Denis Villeneuve, and really, talk about pillars of science fiction. For me, Dune and Blade Runner are at the top of the heap, beyond Star Wars, which is kind of beyond reproach. But this is just a stunning attempt, and I can't wait to next week to hear your take on it.
Spoiler, I love it.
And that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank Jason for the enlightening conversation. In the coming weeks, we'll be covering incredible films made by the cast and crew of Dune 2020, including Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival by Denis Villeneuve. Call Me By Your Name featured the Kwisatz Haderach himself, Timothée Chalamet. No Country for Old Men with Josh Brolin and Javier Bardem, as well as Ex Machina with Oscar Isaac's beard. If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a rating and a review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. Dune Pod is a production of Haitch Industries, a member of the Paper Keg Radio Syndicate. The episode was produced and edited by me, H. Our artwork is by Catcher, and our theme music was composed by Toby Forsman of Whipsong Music. Thanks for listening. We'll see everybody next week.